In the quiet outskirts of Manchester, where industrial chimneys met rolling green fields, Thomas Bennett's life unfolded like a weathered photograph, faded but resilient. At 32, he carried the weight of loss and responsibility on shoulders that had learned to bend but never break. The small cottage where Thomas lived with his 7-year-old daughter Emily bore silent witness to their daily struggles. Every morning before the town stirred awake, Thomas would carefully prepare Emily's lunch, pack her school bag, and ensure her uniform was neatly pressed. His wife, Rachel, had passed away 3 years earlier from a sudden illness, leaving behind a void that no amount of love could completely fill. Thomas worked 2 jobs to keep their small world turning. By day, he toiled in the local factory, operating heavy machinery with calloused hands and a determined spirit. His colleagues respected him, a quiet man who never complained, always focused, always reliable. The factory floor echoed with the rhythmic sounds of metal and machinery, but Thomas's mind often drifted to Emily, his reason for enduring each challenging moment. As evening approached, he would rush to his second job as a night security guard at a nearby industrial complex. The long hours meant little sleep and constant exhaustion, but Thomas never let his fatigue show, especially not in front of his daughter. Emily was his everything, a bright-eyed girl who carried her mother's smile and her father's stubborn resilience. Their cottage was small but meticulously maintained. Every penny was carefully counted, every expense thoughtfully considered. Emily's school shoes were always polished, her homework always completed. Thomas might have been struggling financially, but he was determined that his daughter would never feel the weight of their economic challenges. Winter was particularly harsh that year. The heating was minimal, and Thomas would often wear an extra layer to ensure Emily stayed warm. He would read her stories by candlelight, his voice soft and comforting, creating a world of imagination that temporarily escaped their financial constraints. Emily would listen, her eyes wide with wonder, completely unaware of the sacrifices her father made daily. At the local community center, Thomas was known as the quiet, hard-working single father. The town understood his story, a man who had lost his wife but never lost his commitment to his daughter. Neighbors would sometimes leave small packages, a home-baked pie, a knitted sweater, a bag of groceries, understanding that sometimes silent support speaks louder than words. Emily was a bright child, excelling in school despite their challenging circumstances. Her teachers admired her resilience and her ability to remain cheerful. She knew their life was different from other families, but she never felt less. Thomas had ensured that love filled any gaps that money might create. On weekends, they would take long walks through the countryside, collecting wildflowers, watching local wildlife, and sharing quiet moments. These were the times Thomas treasured most, when the burden of survival lifted, and they could simply be a father and daughter, enjoying each other's company. The local factory where Thomas worked was facing potential closure, a fact that hung over him like a dark cloud. He knew that losing this job would mean an even more difficult path. But Thomas was not a man who surrendered easily. He believed that with hard work, determination, and love, they could overcome any challenge. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world was still asleep, Thomas would sit by the window watching the first rays of sunlight break through the morning mist. He would think about Rachel, about the life they had planned, about the future he was now solely responsible for creating. Tears would sometimes silently fall, but they were quickly wiped away. There was no time for prolonged grief when survival demanded constant attention. Emily, unaware of the depth of her father's struggles, would occasionally surprise him with a drawing, a handmade card, or a spontaneous hug. These moments were his true wealth, more valuable than any monetary compensation. In her innocent love, Thomas found his strength, his purpose, his reason to continue fighting against seemingly insurmountable odds. As the first light of day began to fill their small cottage, Thomas would prepare for another day, another opportunity to provide, to love, to hope. Their story was not about grand achievements or extraordinary circumstances, but about the quiet, persistent love that helps ordinary people navigate extraordinary challenges. The day was just beginning, and with it came another chance to build a better future. One moment, one decision, one loving gesture at a time. The factory whistle blew unexpectedly on a cold Tuesday morning, signaling more than just the end of a shift. Thomas stood motionless as the factory manager, Robert Miller, delivered the news that would change everything. Budget cuts meant the closure of their production line, and dozens of workers, including Thomas, would be losing their jobs immediately. At 45, Robert spoke with a tired voice that suggested he took no pleasure in the announcement. The economic downturn had been brutal on local industries, and this factory had been struggling for months. Thomas listened quietly, his mind racing with thoughts of Emily and their mounting bills. Walking home that day felt different. The streets of Manchester seemed colder, more unforgiving. Each step carried the weight of uncertainty. Thomas's hands, which had been reliable workers for 15 years, now felt empty. He thought about the mortgage, Emily's school expenses, and the stack of unpaid bills hidden in the kitchen drawer. Emily noticed something was wrong the moment he walked through the door. Her father, usually strong and composed, looked defeated. She watched silently as he sat at the kitchen table, his lunchbox untouched, staring into space. At 7 years old, she understood more than most children her age. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, placing her small hand on his shoulder. Thomas managed a weak smile. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart," he said, trying to convince himself as much as her. The next few weeks were a blur of job applications and mounting stress. The local job center became Thomas's second home. He would spend hours searching for work, attending interviews, and hoping for a breakthrough. Each rejection felt like a personal failure, though he never let Emily see his disappointment. Their savings began to dwindle quickly. Thomas started selling some of their furniture, making careful calculations about what they could live without. Emily's winter coat was patched rather than replaced. Meals became simpler, more economical. Thomas mastered the art of creating nutritious meals from the most basic ingredients. One rainy afternoon, while walking home from another unsuccessful job interview, Thomas noticed a help-wanted sign at the local community center. It was a maintenance position, far from his previous factory work, but a potential lifeline. He hesitated, then pushed open the door. Margaret Wilson, the center's manager, was different from most people Thomas had encountered. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. When Thomas explained his situation, she listened genuinely, not with the pitying look he had grown to despise. "We need someone who can handle multiple tasks," Margaret explained. "It's not just about fixing things. We need someone who can help with various community programs, maintain our facilities, and occasionally assist with administrative work." Thomas's heart raced. It wasn't a factory job, but it was a job. His pride wanted to refuse, but his responsibility to Emily demanded he consider every opportunity. The interview was unlike any Thomas had experienced. Margaret didn't just ask about his skills. She asked about his life, his daughter, his dreams. She saw potential where others saw just another unemployed worker. That evening, Thomas returned home with a glimmer of hope. The job wasn't confirmed, but for the first time in weeks he felt something other than desperation. Emily noticed the change immediately. The tension that had filled their small cottage seemed to lift slightly. "Guess what?" Thomas said, pulling Emily close. "We might have a new adventure coming our way." The community center represented more than just a potential job. It was a symbol of hope, of community, of the possibility that life could turn around when least expected. Thomas understood that survival wasn't just about finding work. It was about maintaining dignity, showing resilience, and never giving up. As night fell and Emily slept peacefully, Thomas sat by the window, watching the rain. The challenges seemed enormous, but so did his love for his daughter. Whatever came next, they would face it together, one day at a time. The unexpected had arrived, and with it a chance for something new. Thomas Bennett was ready to embrace it. The community center became Thomas's new world. What started as a maintenance job slowly transformed into an unexpected journey of learning and hope. Margaret Wilson, with her practical wisdom and kind heart, saw something special in Thomas that went beyond his ability to fix things. During lunch breaks, Margaret began showing Thomas how to use computers. At first, he felt clumsy and out of place. His calloused hands used to factory machinery and repair tools seemed awkward on the keyboard, but Emily's excitement became his motivation. Each evening, she would sit beside him, her young eyes bright with curiosity. "Dad, press this button," Emily would say, pointing at the computer screen. Her enthusiasm was infectious. Thomas realized that learning wasn't just about him, it was about creating a better future for his daughter. The community center was more than just a workplace. It was a hub of activity, filled with people from all walks of life. Thomas learned to navigate computer systems, slowly building confidence with each passing week. Margaret was patient, breaking down complex tasks into simple steps that Thomas could understand. At home, their small cottage transformed. The kitchen table, once a place of worry, became a learning space. Emily would help her father practice typing, giggling when he made mistakes. They turned learning into a game, with Thomas creating simple challenges for himself. Local computer classes became Thomas's lifeline. He would attend evening sessions, balancing work, learning, and parenting. Some nights he would return home exhausted, but the spark in Emily's eyes made every moment worthwhile. She was proud of her father in a way that went beyond words. The other workers at the community center began to notice Thomas's transformation. What had started as a simple maintenance job was becoming something more. Margaret saw potential that Thomas hadn't seen in himself. She recommended additional training programs, helping him understand that skills could be learned at any age. Emily became Thomas's biggest supporter. She would help him practice computer skills, setting up small challenges and celebrating each achievement. Their bond grew stronger through this shared journey of learning. Thomas realized that unemployment wasn't the end. It was an opportunity for something new. The local library became another learning ground. Thomas would borrow basic computer books, studying during his free moments. Emily would sit beside him, sometimes reading alongside her father, other times working on her own homework. Their cottage became a sanctuary of learning and hope. Financial challenges hadn't disappeared, but they felt less overwhelming. Thomas was developing skills that could open new doors. The computer training gave him a sense of purpose he had lost when the factory closed. Each small achievement felt like a victory against the circumstances that had tried to defeat him. Margaret saw more than just a maintenance worker. She recognized Thomas's dedication, his willingness to learn, his commitment to improving himself for his daughter. She began introducing him to more complex tasks at the community center, slowly expanding his responsibilities. Winter came, bringing with it new challenges. But Thomas and Emily faced them differently now. Their evenings were filled with learning, hope, and shared dreams. The computer became a window to possibilities they hadn't imagined before. One evening, as Thomas was practicing a complex spreadsheet, Emily looked up at him with pure admiration. "You're becoming really good at this, Dad," she said, her small hand touching his arm. Thomas realized that unemployment had not broken him. It had given him an opportunity to reinvent himself. The skills he was learning were more than just technical knowledge. They were a path to a new future, a way to show Emily that challenges could be overcome with persistence and love. The community center had become more than a workplace. It was a place of transformation, of hope, of second chances. Thomas Bennett was writing a new chapter of his life, one computer lesson at a time. As night fell and Emily prepared for bed, Thomas looked at the computer screen. The fears that had once consumed him were slowly being replaced by possibility. He was learning, growing, changing, not just for himself, but for the little girl who believed in him more than he had ever believed in himself. The glimmer of hope had become a steady, burning light. The morning sunlight filtered through the community center's windows, casting a warm glow on Thomas Bennett's determined face. Months of learning and hard work were about to pay off in ways he never expected. Margaret Wilson watched, quietly as Thomas completed a complex administrative task, his fingers moving confidently across the keyboard. "We have a proposition for you," Margaret said one Wednesday afternoon. The center needed someone to manage their computer systems and help with administrative tasks. It wasn't just a maintenance job anymore. This was a real opportunity. Thomas listened, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. The position came with better pay, regular hours, and a chance to use the computer skills he had worked so hard to develop. Emily would be the first to know, and Thomas could already imagine her excited reaction. His daughter had been his biggest supporter, his reason for pushing through every challenge. That evening, the small cottage buzzed with excitement. Emily jumped around the kitchen, her excitement impossible to contain. "Dad, this is amazing," she shouted, hugging Thomas tightly. The days of constant worry seemed to be fading, replaced by a new sense of hope and possibility. The new job wasn't just about money. It was about transformation. Thomas had learned to see himself differently, no longer just a factory worker but a skilled professional with potential. The computer skills he had struggled to learn were now his greatest asset. Margaret had become more than just a boss. She was a mentor, someone who saw potential where others saw limitation. Thomas understood that age was not a barrier to learning, that determination could overcome any obstacle. Each day at the community center became a new opportunity to grow, to learn, to improve. Emily's school performance began to improve. Thomas could now help her with homework, using the computer skills he had learned. They would sit together, exploring educational websites, working on projects. The bond between father and daughter grew stronger with each passing day. The local job market had been brutal, but Thomas had refused to give up. His journey proved that persistence could create opportunities where none seemed to exist. He became an inspiration to other workers at the community center, a living example of how learning could change everything. Financial pressures began to ease. Thomas could now plan for the future, something he hadn't done in years. He started a small savings account for Emily's education, a dream that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Each small achievement felt like a victory against the challenges that had tried to defeat him. Community members noticed the change in Thomas. He went from being a quiet, worried worker to a confident, helpful member of the community. The computer skills he had learned became a way to help others, to solve problems, to make a difference. One afternoon, a local school asked Thomas to help with their computer training program. He would teach basic computer skills to adults struggling to find work. The irony was not lost on him. He who had once felt lost was now helping others find their way. Emily watched her father with pride. She saw a transformation that went beyond job skills. Thomas had shown her the power of persistence, of learning, of never giving up. Their relationship had always been strong, but now it was built on mutual respect and shared dreams. The community center became a symbol of hope. Thomas's story spread, inspiring others who felt trapped by unemployment or limited opportunities. He became living proof that it was never too late to learn, to change, to grow. As winter turned to spring, Thomas reflected on the journey. The factory closure that had once seemed like the end of everything was now just a distant memory. He had turned a moment of crisis into an opportunity for growth, for transformation. Emily's bedtime conversations now included discussions about computer skills, about learning, about possibilities. Thomas would tell her stories of his day, explaining the challenges he had overcome. She listened with wide-eyed wonder, seeing her father as a hero in the truest sense. The turning point wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small decisions, of persistent learning, of refusing to give up. Thomas Bennett had rewritten his story, not through grand gestures, but through daily commitment and love. As night fell and Emily drifted off to sleep, Thomas looked at the future with hope. The computer screen glowed softly, a symbol of the possibilities that lay ahead, for him and for his daughter. The evening classes became Thomas Bennett's new adventure. With Emily's unwavering support, he enrolled in a technical certification program at the local college. The classroom felt different from his factory days, filled with hope, possibility, and determination. Students half his age looked at Thomas with respect. He wasn't just another student. He was a living example of perseverance. His hands, once calloused from factory work, now moved confidently across textbooks and computer keyboards. Emily would help him prepare, quizzing him during dinner, her young mind absorbing everything. Margaret Wilson continued to support Thomas's journey. She adjusted his work schedule at the community center, ensuring he could attend evening classes. "You're never too old to learn," she would remind him, her eyes twinkling with encouragement. The certification wasn't just a piece of paper. It represented something much bigger, a second chance, a new beginning. Thomas remembered the days of uncertainty, of worrying about providing for Emily. Now he was showing her that life could change, that dreams could be rebuilt. Emily had become his biggest motivation. At 9 years old, she understood the value of hard work more than most adults. She would prepare Thomas's lunch for his evening classes, carefully packing his bag, leaving little encouraging notes. "You can do this, Dad," she would write in her childish handwriting. The technical course challenged Thomas in ways he had never experienced. Computer networks, programming basics, system management, concepts that once seemed impossible were now becoming second nature. He discovered a passion for technology he never knew existed. Weekends became study time. Father and daughter would sit together, Thomas working on complex technical assignments, Emily doing her school homework. Their small cottage transformed into a learning center, filled with books, computers, and shared dreams. His colleagues at the community center noticed the change. Thomas was no longer just the maintenance worker. He was becoming a technical expert, someone people would ask for help and advice. The transformation was remarkable, from a struggling single father to a respected professional. Financial pressures began to ease. The certification opened doors to better job opportunities. Thomas started receiving job offers that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Local businesses recognized his dedication, his willingness to learn, his unique life experience. Emily's school noticed changes in their family dynamic. Her teachers commented on her increased confidence, her understanding of hard work and determination. She would proudly tell her classmates about her father's journey, about how learning could change everything. The local newspaper even did a small feature on Thomas's story. A middle-aged worker who had lost his job, gone back to school, and transformed his life. It wasn't just his story. It was a story of hope for many in the community who felt stuck or defeated. Margaret continued to be a mentor and friend. She saw Thomas not just as an employee, but as someone who represented the true spirit of resilience. Their relationship went beyond work. She had become a part of their small family's journey. As the certification program neared its end, Thomas reflected on the journey. The factory closure that had once seemed like a disaster was now a distant memory. He had turned a moment of crisis into an opportunity for growth, for reinvention. Emily's dreams began to expand. Watching her father's transformation inspired her. She started talking about her own future, about learning, about possibilities. Thomas realized he was teaching her something far more valuable than any technical skill, the power of persistence. The final examination approached. Thomas studied harder than he ever had in his life. Emily would quiz him, make him practice, celebrate his small victories. Their bond had always been strong, but now it was built on mutual respect and shared aspirations. On the night of his final examination, Thomas felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. Emily waited up despite the late hour. When he returned home, she looked at him with pure admiration. "Did you do your best, Dad?" she asked. Thomas hugged his daughter, understanding that the certification was more than a qualification. It was a testament to love, to hope, to the human capacity for change. He had renewed not just his career, but his entire approach to life. As dawn broke, father and daughter sat together, looking towards a future filled with possibility. The struggles remained a memory, but hope, bright, strong, unbreakable hope, had become their most valuable possession.